So actually, I'm going to go back to James. Last week, does anybody remember what I preached on or the message was last week? Who was here? Uh-oh. We got to be doers of the word, not just listeners. Because if we're not doing God's work, then what good of it is? And that goes against a lot of Protestant way of thinking. Because Luther, which a lot of the Protestant churches have come through, it says you don't have to have faith alone. You don't have to have works. And Luther didn't like James because, as we heard, and you read at the very bottom of this, James says faith without works is dead. So let's brew on that for a while. But I'm going to actually go back to the beginning of James. I know a pastor friend who once told his congregation he was going to go on vacation. So that Sunday, they all thought he was going to be gone, and the church began. They started playing. People were coming in, and all of a sudden, this homeless man came in. And the homeless man came into the church, and he sat down at one pew, and the family that he sat down to said, "That's taken." I don't know if you ever saw the movie Forrest Gump. "Seat's taken." And so he got up and moved and went to another pew. Sat down in another pew, and the family that was sitting next to him got up and moved because they didn't want to sit next to him. The service starts, and the whole congregation is waiting for the substitute pastor to come up. Next thing they know, they see the homeless man in the back taking off his wig, taking off his outer clothing, and it was their pastor. He got up there, and he started to cry. Because what he had been preaching, the congregation wasn't getting. That's what this is all about, what James is talking about in the beginning of his letter. Are we showing favoritism? Well, let's imagine we're sitting here, and all of a sudden, Russell Wilson comes in and sits down. Who's here would want to rush over and go sit next to Russell Wilson? If you don't know who Russell Wilson is, the quarterback for the Seahawks. Probably most of us would probably want to go and sit next to him and talk to him, and we would be disrupted by what's going on up front. But Russell Wilson's a beloved child of God, just like we are. He is no more special than anybody who's sitting in this congregation today. Just because he holds the status as being a quarterback doesn't mean he's any better than anybody else. But how often do we show favoritism? James was writing this because it was happening in the churches back then. I can guarantee it's happening in our churches today. It's like myself, if I come in, I go, I'm going to show favoritism to Chuck and Cheryl because they're Cougars. But then we have Lyle and Shelley. They're Huskies. I can't have anything to do with them because they went to that awful school over in Seattle, and they wear purple. Imagine if that was happening in our church. Or, I'm not going to sit next to that person because they voted Republican. Or I'm not going to sit next to that person because they voted Democrat. Or I'm not going to vote for that person because, or whatever. James is saying that cannot happen in our churches. That when we can't show favoritism. So if somebody walks in our church, and let's say they walk in and they have the scarf on their head and they want to come in and worship with us, we welcome them into our church and we don't move away from them. Or we don't say, sorry, you're not allowed in our church because you don't worship the same way we worship. No, I'm not saying that was going to happen at our church. I'd pray to God that wouldn't happen in our church. I'd pray that if somebody who walked in off the street, let's just say somebody from Camp Hope, because we have invited people from Camp Hope to come and worship at our church. That if somebody from Camp Hope came and walked in our church, that when they sat down, we would not move, that we would run over to them and welcome them with the love of God. That's my hope. Because that's what Christ has asked us to do. not to show favoritism, not to think I'm better than somebody else, that we're all equal in the eyes of God. I love the book of James because he gets right to the crux that we need to understand. Last week it was you can hear the word, but if you're just hearing the word, you're not going out and doing the word, what good is that? If people that are different than you are coming into your church and you're ignoring them and acting like that you're better than them, what good is that? Is that showing the love of Christ? The one thing that I've seen in our country right now is that we have put everybody into different boxes. We divided, and we continue to divide, and divide, and divide, and divide. A couple weeks ago, I talked about the armor of God and talked about the evil one, or whatever you want to call it. I think when we continue to divide one another, that is when we see Satan at work in our midst. Because when we put ourselves into different boxes and different categories, we split ourselves. And we see it in the United Methodist Church. We have this big vote that's coming on. We're going to be hearing more about that. But we see division because people don't see each other as beloved children of God. Oh, I see you as a Democrat. Oh, I see you as a Republican. Oh, I see you as a Husky. Oh, I see you as a cougar. Yeah! Is that showing love? At camp, and I know I've talked about this, but I just want to hit it again. When I'm at camp with the kids, I make them, every time I see them, turn to one another and tell them that they are beloved children of God, that we are beloved children of God. And when we don't see other people as beloved children of God, we see them as a category. Then we forget that they are beloved children of God. And that's why we see the division in our country today, because we look at who they are and what they are instead of being beloved children of God. Imagine if each and every one of us thought that we were beloved children of God, what a different country we would live in. What a different world we would live in if we understood that everybody is a beloved creature of God. And not a white male or a Hispanic male, but beloved children of God. And where do we get this? Why do I continue to say this? It's because of what Jesus taught us. Look at the verse out of Matthew this morning. What did Jesus do? He went up to a Gentile, the Syrophoenician. I had it spelled out and I even messed it up. Syrophoenician woman who was a Gentile that Jesus shouldn't have touched, but Jesus went up to her and Jesus taught her a lesson. A female Gentile woman in those times would have been thought as really nothing. Taught Jesus a lesson. Wow. Then he goes up to the blind person and he heals him. There is no 1% in Jesus. There's 100%. Jesus loves everybody. Jesus is willing to share his love with everybody. He's willing to heal everybody. He doesn't care if you're an American. He doesn't care if you're European. What he cares is that you are a beloved child of God. That's what it boils down to. And it boils down, and Matthew even brings it up, what I preach every Sunday. I guess that's why I like Matthew, because James, we are on the same wavelength. Love your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. He didn't say that, but love your neighbors, you love yourself. Because if you see your neighbor hurting, you take care of them. You don't walk by. If your neighbor's hungry, you feed them. If you see an orphan that needs a home, either you take them in or you find them a home. If you see somebody who's hungry, you feed them. That is what faith is. Because when we do that, faith isn't dead. Faith is alive. And I want to see faith in this church alive and well as we treat each other as beloved children of God. Amen.